Hello, Wednesday Warriors. This is for the Wednesday Warriors Bible Study Group. We're studying the little book called The Red Sea Rules by Robert J. Morgan. And I'm recording each chapter one at a time. And today I'm recording Red Sea Rule number 8. Trust God to deliver in His own unique way. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. That's from Exodus 14:21 and 22. And so for those of you who have not studied these before, this little book right here, The Red Sea Rules, it's 10 God-given strategies for difficult times. Most all of this book, and there's other scriptures included, but most all of the book is based on Exodus 14, if you'd like to read that along with this. His miraculous ways. There came a mighty wind like a wedge and split the sea wide open, clear to its center. That's a quote by B.H. Carroll. The Israelites, stock still and silent, watched in unbearable suspense as the old man raised his rod over the obstructing sea. An eastern wind suddenly gusted from heaven, tugging at the beards and cloaks of the multitude, who were mostly skeptics. They watched slack-jawed as the downdrift intensified, hit the water, and slowly plowed through the sea. The waves rose in foam and fury, forming translucent walls that became an avenue for them and later an ambush for their enemies. A gateway to the one and a graveyard to the other. It was the Old Testament's most dramatic object lesson, one of God's greatest miracles. Its simple lesson, trust God to deliver in His own unique way. That's His specialty. The Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you. Deuteronomy 23:14. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Psalms 34:19. He shall deliver you in 6 troubles. Yes, in 7 no evil shall touch you. Job 5:19. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations. 2 Peter 2:9. Christ gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from the present evil age. Galatians 1:4. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. Psalms 50:15. The Lord will deliver me from every evil work and preserve me for his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever. 2 Timothy 4:18. But does he still live? Does he deliver from financial woes, marital problems, emotional confusion, harm and danger, self-destructive habits, disease? Yes, absolutely. But we must have God's perspective on deliverance, for he doesn't always view things as we do. My thoughts are not your thoughts, the Lord cautions in Isaiah 55:8, nor are your ways my ways. We must view God's deliverance not by emotional reflex, human standards, or even common sense, but the biblical truth. God will deliver his children from every evil work, from every peril and problem, from tribulation, even from death itself. But there are no cookie cutters in heaven. God doesn't have standardized, same-size-fits-all solutions to our various problems. He treats every situation as singular and special, and He designs a unique, tailor-made deliverance to every trial and trouble. Does He still cleave the seas? Do miracles still occur? Real miracles? Yes, when He chooses. And here are some examples. Christian Claypool from Kirby Free Will Baptist in Detroit took a mission trip to Cuba. Wanting to smuggle Spanish Bibles to a community of Christians there, Christian wore several layers of clothing to conserve space in her unique suitcase for the contraband. But her old appearance drew the attention of security agents at every airport. Christian had to open her suitcase at her departure city, then again in the Bahamas. Arriving in Cuba, she was alarmed again to be singled out and ordered to open her suitcase. The zipper wouldn't budge, and she could only open it about 2 inches. She fought with it until at length the guard impatiently took over the struggle. Despite prolonged efforts, the zipper wouldn't budge. Christian was perplexed, for it was a new suitcase and had been opened several times before. In exasperation, the guard finally shoved it toward her and told her to go on. Arriving at her hotel, Christian looked for a knife to cut open her luggage, but when she gave the zipper a tug, it easily opened. The Bibles weren't distributed as intended. Another modern-day miracle occurred early in history of the Pacific Garden Mission of Chicago, which got its start in the 1880s, when a notorious saloon called the Pacific Beer Garden was leased by a sweet Christian couple, George and Sarah Clark. Dropping the word beer, they added the word mission and launched a ministry to downtrodden men and women. In the early years, Colonel and Mrs. Clark bore the cost of the work themselves, but the ministry's growth depleted their funds. Eventually, they couldn't pay the rent, and Colonel Clark had only 24 hours to make a payment. Otherwise, they would lose the lease. Colonel and Mrs. Clark prayed throughout the night, reminding the Lord of the luckless whose lives were being salvaged. Emerging from their house at daybreak, they gasped. Their yard was blanketed in white. Looking closer, they discovered the lawn was covered with mushrooms of highest quality, though it wasn't even the season for mushrooms. Gathering the crop, the Clarks carried the mushrooms down to the Palmer house and sold them to the chefs for enough money to pay the rent. Years later, Mother Clark commented on the experience and said, "No mushrooms were ever seen there before, nor any since." In her biography, Go Home and Tell, Bertha Smith tells of traveling by rickshaw to a primitive village in China to devote several days to evangelistic work. Her living conditions were squalid. She shared a stall with an ox and with a swarm of flies. Finally, she prayed, "Lord, I am one of your spoiled children. All my life I have been accustomed to screened houses and clean food. Now I just can't eat with those flies all over my food. Down in Egypt, you had flies come and go at your word. You're the same today. Now please do one of 2 things for me. Either take the flies away or enable me to just go ahead and eat and not mind them. You then take care of any disease germs which they may put in my body. Whichever you wish to do will be good enough for me." Which do you think God did? Not a fly flew into that ox stall the remaining 5 days that I was there witnessing and teaching, wrote Bertha. You will agree that was a miracle. That was a no-fly zone in the truest sense of the phrase. God can jam zippers, grow mushrooms, evict flies, and carve pathways through the sea whenever he wishes. His arm is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. Cameron Thompson said, "We have a God who begins with the impossible and goes on from there. So remember, when the children of Israel were trapped and afraid, twixt forbidding tides and Pharaoh's tirade, Jehovah commanded and Moses obeyed. As pitiful prayers filled the impossible place, as Moses gazed into Jehovah's dread face, as the people of God needed infinite grace, the mighty winds howled, the violent waves dashed. The sea waters quivered and the lightning flashed. The thunders boomed and the breakers crashed. And when the sun arose on that terrible day, the children of Israel, through the misty spray, discovered their God had made them a way. As many Christians in the years that have passed, though troubled by fears, though tired and harassed, have found the same God strong, sure, and steadfast." And that was written by Robert J. Morgan. His providential ways. When the light of divine providence has once shone upon a godly man, he is then relieved and set free not only from the extreme anxiety and fear that were pressing him before, but from every care. And that's a quote by John Calvin. Though miracles still occur, God uses them sparingly. Even in Scripture, miracles were not God's standard operating procedure. Many people assume the Bible is packed with miracles, but it isn't. Only during certain periods in biblical history were there clusterings of signs and wonders. During the Exodus, during the ministries of Elijah and Elisha, during the life of Christ, and the early days of the apostles. Throughout most of the Bible, God helped his people in ordinary, providential ways rather than in overtly supernatural ones. The same is true today. That's why mature Christians pay special attention to the accidents, misfortunes, and coincidences that befall them, for in reality, there are no such things, only the providential ordering of a God who watches over his prayerful, trusting children and whose unseen hand is guiding, guarding, arranging, and rearranging circumstances. Last year, our youth minister, Mike Hollifield, and I were traveling to Sweden to teach at Holsby Brunn Bible School. As we left Nashville, the airline agent looked at our tickets with concern. "There's a mistake here," she said. "I'll correct it, or you may have trouble getting back." After a few minutes at the computer, she handed us new tickets and smiled and wished us a good trip. But when we tried to return home 2 weeks later, we were told that she had inadvertently canceled our westbound flights. Our names were nowhere in the computer, and our tickets were worthless. After hours of negotiation and anxiety of waiting, we finally squeezed onto an oversold flight and given the least desirable seats ever assigned by an airline. But as it happened, Mike was beside a Danish businessman who was open to hearing the gospel. For 6 long transatlantic hours, Mike quietly talked with him about his life and about the wonderful difference Jesus Christ could make. It wasn't an example of airline incompetence, it was an instant of divine providence. A few years ago, our daughter called from Columbia International University telling us she wanted to transfer to the University of Tennessee, but she didn't want to live in the dorms. She wondered whether we could drive up to Knoxville and find her an apartment near campus. Though Katrina and I had mixed feelings about her transferring, we accepted our assignment stoically. But arriving in Knoxville, we had no idea where to look. As we drove through the streets around campus, our hearts sank. Some of the buildings had rooms to rent signs, but they were rough and run down. I didn't want Hannah in any of them, and we made no inquiries. Pulling to the curb, we bowed our heads in prayer. I had recently been studying the book of Genesis, so I prayed, Lord, when Abraham's servant was on a mission in Genesis 24, he requested an angel to guide him. Now please send that angel, or one just like him, to guide us to a safe, desirable apartment for our daughter. We pulled back into the streets, turned the corner, and immediately saw a stately brick building, clean and well tended. The plaque on the side listed it as a historical site. An arched entrance opened to a grassy square with a bubbling fountain. That looks like an apartment building, I told Katrina. I think I'll check. Don't waste your time, she replied. We could never afford that. I checked anyway. As I walked through the courtyard, I came upon an older woman, purse and keys in hand, who eyed me warily. She was the manager, and she said that the apartments were primarily for graduate students and career professionals. We like it very quiet here, no parties. We turn the undergrads away. But as we talked, she began to warm up. She finally admitted to having one small efficiency available, and yes, she would rent it to us for Hannah. If I like her when I meet her, when she told me the price, I stiffed a smile. It was less than the flop house around the corner. Today, Hannah is still safely quartered in that apartment. I'm certain the Lord sent an angel to guide us. In the unfolding of His providence, burdens become blessings, tears lead to triumph, and the redemptive grace of God overcomes the undercurrents of life in the experience of His children. For them, all things work together for good to those who show love to the Lord and are called according to His purpose. No wonder Charles Spurgeon once quipped, "We believe in the providence of God, but we do not believe half enough in it." His mysterious ways. God marks across some of our days. We'll explain later. That's a quote by Vince Havner. And then there are God's mysterious deliverances. In the faith chapter of the Bible, Hebrews 11, after citing some miraculous and providential escapes for God's people, the writer suddenly changes tone. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormenting, of whom the world was not worthy. That's in verses 35-38. When God does not deliver overtly through a miracle or covertly by providence, He will deliver mysteriously with a deeper level and intervention than we can discern. In the end, it will be better for us, though for a time we may be perplexed. In his last letter, the Apostle Paul boasted, "The Lord will deliver me from every evil work and preserve me for his heavenly kingdom." 2 Timothy 4:18. Yet he was beheaded days later, his body cast aside, and his head tossed into the grave after him. Was he, after all, delivered? Yes. He was snatched away from the evil that surrounded him, removed from tears, pain, stress, and sickness, taken where Satan could no longer harass and be present with the Lord, which is far better. When Vance Havner, the Rye, North Carolina evangelist, lost his wife to disease, he was disconsolate. But out of the experience, he later wrote, "When before the throne we stand, in him complete, all the riddles that puzzle us here will fall into place, and we shall know the fulfillment, what we now believe in faith, that all things work together for good in his eternal purpose. No longer will we cry, 'My God, why?' Instead, alas, will become, hallelujah. All question marks will be straightened into exclamation points, sorrow will change into singing, and pain will be lost in praise." In the vortex of God's mysterious ways, John 13:7 becomes a key verse for Christians. Jesus answered and said to him, "What am I doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this." During the Korean War, a humble Christian servant was torn from his family by the communists, never to see them again. Pastor M. suffered years of imprisonment, locked in a dark cell, and fed only a bowl of slop each day. But he kept his courage by reciting Bible verses, especially John 13:7. "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this." This verse also carried a professor of mine through a dark period in his life. After his beloved wife, Anne, succumbed to cancer, Dr. Anthony Fortosis wrote, "Why did the Lord send this most grievous of trials? Why did he take home a wife and a mother so early in her ministry? Why? I am content that his will is always good and acceptable. What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter." John 13:7 is good enough for me. William Cowper, the English poet who wrote the hymn, "God Moves in Mysterious Ways," struggled all his life with melancholy. According to Ernest Emurian's Living Stories of Famous Hymns, Cowper wrote this hymn following a period near suicidal depression. Calling for a carriage, Cowper ordered the driver to take him to the Ouse River 3 miles away, where he planned to kill himself. The driver, sensing the state of his passenger, breathed a prayer of thanks when dense fog enveloped the area, and he purposely lost his way in the fog, jogging up one road and down another as Cowper fell into a deep sleep. Several hours passed, the driver going in circles, letting his passenger rest. Finally, he returned Cowper to his home. "We're back home," explained Cowper. "How is that?" "We got lost in the fog, sir. Sorry." Cowper paid his fare, went inside, and pondered how he had been spared from self-destruction by the mercy of God. That same evening in 1774, Cowper, age 43, wrote this autobiographical hymn. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. He plans his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. You fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. You can well trust him to save and deliver you from every evil work and preserve you for his heavenly kingdom. He will save and deliver in his own unique way, whether miraculous, providential, or mysterious. He always does that for his children. That's his specialty. Okay, thank you everyone for listening, and we will continue on next week to discuss this chapter, and we'll go over the study questions on Red Sea Rule number 8. Thank you. Bye.